Let's begin like this. It is Thursday, April 3rd, a day that is now etched in the history of failed economic policy and self-inflicted political wounds as President Trump's broad, completely untargeted tariffs are tanking the U.S. markets, wreaking havoc on American companies, ensuring now much higher prices on American consumers, undercutting over the long haul American jobs, risking a recession, and that's according to many experts in the coverage we've seen all across this chaotic day. And let's be clear, Trump's policies slapping a giant tax on Americans, as his former VP Mike Pence put it today. Numbers do not lie. We always try to show you the facts here and lead with the facts. And while some numbers are so bad that we can all reasonably agree it's not a good thing, it's a bad thing, I want to begin not with my observation or Nicole's or what we've discussed in plain English, but the numbers that show these are the most damaging tariffs in a century. And this is now, today, the largest stock slide since the global pandemic first arrived in President Trump's first term.
Markets look set to sell off as Donald Trump imposes the steepest U.S. import levies in a century.
I don't think there's a single positive take on this. This is all just bad.
Stock set to wipe out nearly $2 trillion in market value.
Taking a plunge as investors react to the sweeping tariffs.
The world was yesterday sort of bracing for a bazooka, but Trump decided he was going to go the Chicago way, and he dropped an economic Moab.
And they are going to turn it upside down, and I think 50-50 into a recession.
Markets tanking. Experts warning of a recession which would be self-inflicted by a new president in the beginning of the term, almost unheard of. In fact, to find a stock slide this bad, as mentioned, you have to go beyond any of the normal volatility. You have to go beyond the inflation-plagued Biden term. And you have to go back to that unusual moment, which we all shared together, when the world began to grasp that it was facing a global pandemic in COVID. The market is a collection of companies and people reacting to events. And it began to quickly absorb how bad the pandemic was going to be. And that was the last time we saw this large a drop. Stocks suffer biggest one-day wipeout in value since that March 2020 pandemic is the Wall Street Journal's headline today, a kind of a Bible for Wall Street. You can see the steep plunge in the combined drop there among the 500 largest companies. Those are the biggest companies that trade publicly. And you can see the reaction quite clear to the Trump tariff announcement, these new tariffs that escalate what was already a costly trade war. It is hard to put the numbers, which I told you is how we're leading tonight, so you can just remember some of the basic math, but it's hard to actually put them in perspective. I could tell you that that is a sudden, seismic 4.8% drop in all of those stocks, the 500 stocks traded on S&P, or I could estimate the value. It's a rough number, but it is a big one. That drop constitutes, in response to Trump's plan, which he was warned against, over $2 trillion lost here. Similar story on the Dow, down about 4%. The other broad stock exchange, the NASDAQ, even worse, plummeting 6%. This is the math. Numbers don't lie. These are the new Trump tariffs, which, as many people warned, many experts warned, and many Trump allies, Republicans, Wall Street veterans warned, are now sinking every market index, battering U.S. stocks. Another way to put it, if you're not into all the numbers and the composites and what's it all mean, if Donald Trump had just done nothing yesterday, if he had just not shown up to work and done any new policy, we'd be trillions of dollars richer in our economy. Trillions would not be lost. That's what it meant for him to go to work yesterday and do what he does. Now, let me show you one more. I didn't want to kind of overdo all the indexes, but the broadest measurement you can do of companies, not just the big ones. If you hear Bernie Sanders and other people talk about the fat cats on Wall Street, but of course, a lot of things run through companies in our capitalist system. You have medium-sized businesses. You have small-cap businesses, which might not be your local restaurant, but they're a lot smaller than some New York-based big conglomerate. If you look at the measure that includes more companies they're actually hit the worst. In other words, I mentioned that 4% was trillions. The 2000 index of the companies that include smaller companies located in other parts of the country, et cetera, they're actually taking it the worst. And there's a lot of Trump voters and frankly, a lot of people in general affected, but that's down 21% from its market high. These tariffs from Trump are escalating the trade war to new heights. They're guaranteeing more countermeasures in the trade war as they hit every country, big or small, rich or poor. Take one conservative magazine that tracks this very closely, The Economist. They call it now Ruination Day, showing President Trump quite literally sawing the U.S. off the map. A self-inflicted wound, isolating us from the rest of the global economy. It's a contrast from a few months back under Biden, when The Economist, which is a right-leaning kind of pro-corporate but internationally objective magazine, that's what they say they are, commented that at that point we had the economy that was the envy of the world. More headlines today. Trump tariffs sinking markets, economic havoc, Wall Street reeling, stocks plunging. That is the brutal reality. And since you watch the news or listen to the sound of your MSNBC anchors telling you what's happening in the world, you are probably reasonably informed and you probably follow politics to some degree. This story is well beyond politics and news nerds, if you will. It's my job to sometimes tell you, hey, it's a little bit of a slower news day, or this thing may not break through, or we had a Senate vote, but it's not going to pass the House, so it's not the biggest deal. Today's the opposite. I have to tell you, this is a big deal. This is very bad. This is not one of those things that will be viewed through different partisan lenses, and it can't be lied away because a lot of people are going to be paying higher prices and worried about a recession, and U.S. jobs will be affected, and the charts show it's all a response to Donald Trump's plans, which he didn't have to do. Think back to Biden, Obama era, Bush. Do you ever remember a major announcement of indiscriminate tariffs that sunk the economy? No, because it didn't happen. It didn't have to happen. This is Donald Trump's choice. We are living in Donald Trump's America. And if I may, there were a heck of a lot of people, including on Wall Street, who said, don't worry about the rhetoric. This can be good for business. They were wrong. They may not admit it, and they may start telling different stories about what they said, but he had the business support, he had the tech support, he had a heck of a lot of people who want lower taxes saying, it'll be good for business. Wrong. Let's look at the response from business as it rolled in to Trump's tariffs.
With today's action, we are finally going to be able to make America great again. This will be indeed the golden age of America.
Big market sell-off this hour. It is ugly out there. The S&P 500 down 3.7%.
If they complain, if you want your tariff rate to be zero, then you build your product right here in America.
Burning down the house to cook a steak. That's the line.
For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. In many cases, the friend is worse than the foe.
We've seen the anger in the responses from many of those allies, just the shock, the worst-case scenarios that were being contemplated.
Those were the numbers. Direct response. You heard one of the finance journalists say, burning down the house. I wish it was a Talking Heads reference. I wish we were all just dancing to David Byrne, but burning down the house to cook a steak is a reference to a type of financial idiocy that is so outrageous and predictable, no responsible steward of business would do it. But remember, a lot of the, quote, business that Donald Trump sold was on television. It was fictional. It was a reality show. He's a TV host. With all due respect to anyone who does that job, it is different than actually running a global economy, which people tried to tell you last year. It's not like Donald Trump handled the COVID crisis and crash all that well. That's one of the reasons he himself has said the response to COVID and the way things were going then. He said that's part of why he lost in the rare times when he's not lying about losing. And now, Donald Trump, 70 days in, has brought us back the worst market crash since the COVID pandemic, but because of his own policies. Another way to track this, a top CEO actually shared a moment of candor on what these recorded public earnings calls are, because it was all happening and the CEO reacted to the drop of their company's stock in real time.
In this race, and I don't have, where's our stock now? I mean, really? Okay. Look, I just looked at the screen. I had looked at it. It got hit when I think the tariff came out.
Yes, it did, because the numbers don't lie. And you have the announcement and then trillions lost. There are economists at Yale who say the tariffs could cost you, a typical American household, close to $4,000 per year. So if this continues, that's $8,000, $12,000 counted up. And depending on your spending habits, or if you ever want to buy a car, it would be more than that. That's just an average. This is math, not politics. But the fact that it's math does have other consequences. This undeniable reality has some Trump allies objecting, others trying to talk about this without lying about it and saying it's all good, because that's a tough message to sell right now. Now, Trump does demand a certain loyalty. As mentioned, he's pressured people to say he lost the 2020 election, but if you're going to be his political ally, you have to lie and say that he won. So that's the context. A lot of spinning and exaggeration and lying in the MAGA movement, but even some who flirt with some of that type of stuff are trying a different tune about this math that can't be explained away, this market crash. Everybody knows what's happening here. I just showed you. Trump caused the crash, the pain, and some are acknowledging on the right that pain will hit Americans.
No pain, no gain. That's what we used to tell our football players. There's going to be some pain with tariffs.
And there could be some pain along the way.
Yeah.
But you will be thankful once you go through the tough stuff.
There's absolutely going to be short-term pain. The president's been clear about that. Everyone has.
I'm behind the president 100%. There'll be disruption and pain on the front end.
They have to sell pain, because even in a time where everyone is used to folks spinning everything, if they went out and said, no, this is good, up is down, it's good to lose 20% on those smaller businesses around the country, they'd be laughed out of the room and maybe shown the door in their jobs and districts. So they say, yes, it's painful, but please try pain for a while. Other Republicans are telling Trump to stop the pain. Rand Paul has dealt with Trump, and he's not now appealing to ethics or empathy for the people going through this. He's not trying to wage a factual policy debate. He is appealing to political self-interest, a kind of a double message, not only for Trump, but also for other Republicans who might look at the long term and future elections. And he's making a throwback to the pictures you see on your screen, which is how far back in history you have to go to recall how tariffs ended Republican careers.
Tariffs have also led to political decimation. When Hot Smoothie put on their tariff in the early 1930s, we lost the House and the Senate for 60 years. So they're not only bad economically, they're bad politically.
Fact check, true. There's wide economic data, plus these new indicators about how this works if the tariffs are completely untargeted and you just stoke a trade war. And the politics are obvious. It's the economy, stupid. I mentioned that quote from Trump's own former VP, quote, here it is in full. The Trump tariff tax is the largest peacetime tax hike in U.S. history. It may take a lot more time to see the full reaction and scope. There could be more gyrations. We could have more news nights where we're talking about this kind of stock volatility. But the absurdity overall is clear. Trump has slapped tariffs on an island where the only inhabitants are actually soldiers at a joint U.S.-British military base. There are tariffs that hit islands that are uninhabited, unless you count the penguins. As the markets were plunging this afternoon in what is clearly a crisis, the worst crash since when COVID arrived, Trump said, I'm good, I'm out, goodbye, little wave, little walk. He left work and the White House during this time of economic crisis when you'd want leadership, no matter what caused the crash, to get on the chopper, to go to Florida. He's taking a long weekend to watch a golf tournament and, by extension, promote one of his properties. This is not a drill. This is what's really happening. The election is over. This is the time for governing. And the report card from Wall Street on Donald Trump's governing today is whatever comes below an F. We've got two experts when we're back in 90 seconds.
I wonder what our grocery bill is going to be like. I wonder if we can afford to upgrade our car when it breaks down.
The last time we did across the board massive tariffs was 1929, and there were bread lines.
I think it's really going to hurt our pocketbook.
Citizens, voters responding today to what we're living through. We're joined by Catherine Rampell, expert in this field, also going to be a co-host in our upcoming MSNBC Weekend lineup. Welcome. And Washington Post's Libby Casey. Catherine, what's happening today, and how does it measure up against those historic lows?
Markets are finally realizing that Trump meant what he said when he said he was a tariff man, when he said he planned to impose global tariffs of at least 10%, regardless of whether countries were friend or foe. And frankly, it's remarkable that it's taken market participants this long to realize this, given that he was quite open about it on the campaign. For whatever reason, when Trump talked about tariffs again and again and again, all corporate America heard was, oh, what was that? More tax cuts?
Right.
And not the thing that he emphasized. And now we are seeing the bloodbath that results.
Yeah. Say more. I want to draw you out on that first specific point, because Mitt Romney, a great poet, as we know, once said, corporations are people, my friend. And on the one hand, it was derided because he was suggesting they should get the rights of people. But on the other hand, corporations are made up of people. And you're reminding us that the people in the markets were, as humans, kind of looking the other way on what this guy said he would do.
I think they were wish casting is basically what happened, that they didn't really think that he planned to wage these trade wars because it was so obviously a bad idea, right? Economists are pretty much unanimously against this idea, just as they were back in 1930 when the prior version of this, Smoot-Hawley, passed. There was a huge petition of economists then warning it might potentially lead to something like a Great Depression. And there's a huge, horde of economists of all political stripes and ideologies today who had warned that this would be really, really bad. And so I think that market participants, CEOs, people who are, by the way, paid to get these things right, paid to get these forecasts right, assumed, Trump will have enough people around him who advise him that this is bad. Maybe market declines will, in fact, chasten the president if he goes down this road.
Have
and
they met
instead
him?
that has Well, the first term, of course, there were some adults in the room, and Trump did seem somewhat sensitive to market reaction to various actions he took. This time around, clearly the adults are gone, but beyond that, the market plummeting seems to have only emboldened him somehow. Today, he suggested there might be more tariffs to come on pharmaceuticals, on semiconductors, lots of other important things that American consumers and American companies need in order to survive and make their own products. So I don't know what the objective is at this point for Donald Trump. He has listed a whole bunch of contradictory objectives. Is it about negotiating leverage? Is it about raising revenue? And those objectives are somewhat in tension. Is it about, engendering some sort of manufacturing renaissance, which will not happen given the way he has imposed these tariffs? Nobody knows. Just on its face, it seems like such a dumb idea that in a way, maybe markets were rational to assume that he would not go down this road, except Trump himself is not a rational guy. He's a tariff man, as he says, and instead he has decided to turn what had been the envy of the world, as you point out, the U.S. economy, which was a very robust economy, into something that now we're talking about a recession imminently within the span of 10 weeks.
Libby?
Well,
It could have been a bargaining tactic, right? To Catherine's point, I think lawmakers, some business leaders thought this is just part of the posturing, the bluffing, the businessman making moves, and then he would back down. And we were hearing that from financial advisors and other people who were saying this is just sort of part of the process. But what we were hearing from Republicans today was a very different message. The press secretary of the White House, her message was trust Donald Trump. Now, that might work with Republicans in the House. It seems like it's already working less with some Republicans in the Senate. We did see a bipartisan bill come out today. Chuck Grassley of Iowa, a Republican guy with a lot of farmers in his state, paired up with Maria Cantwell, Democrat of Washington state, to put forth this bill that would require Congress to actually approve any tariffs. Remember, they do have this role to play here. They would have to approve them within 60 days of being floated by the president. And the White House would have to cough up some information and show how the tariffs would actually impact Americans and businesses. But there's not a lot of hope that that bill would actually get anywhere. I'm watching to see if other Republicans will join in. And then the big thing I'm going to be watching is what happens when all these lawmakers go home for recess, which is coming up very soon. They'll be home for a long time in April, and they're going to get an earful from Americans who have a lot of questions and concerns.
And Libby, you don't need to be a market expert watching at home to see the pattern. Nicole Wallace was mentioning Peter Navarro, who's a big China hawk, and the position he was put in by the president. But the Signal debacle, the incompetence on immigration, separate from whether you think there should be tougher or weaker immigration enforcement, they make mistakes. They've got a lot of people who are inexperienced, that's the most respectful way to put it, for these posts. And so even the tariff experts that he has great resources in the federal government to draw on while they fire a lot of people and gut that stuff. Newsweek has the headline, Trump puts tariffs on islands inhabited only by penguins. And so they're the wild, most remote places on Earth. We've got the internet weighing in, pay the tariffs, and the penguins are taking their business elsewhere. And the penguins are known, as you know, Libby, to be reasonable. So to, to upset them that way. But it speaks to a level of incompetence that anyone who did any basic research would say, well, let's pull out these other uninhabited islands because they have no economic result, and we would look like we didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the reactions of world leaders, it's like they are having such strong reactions because they are going to be impacted just like American consumers are. And so they're looking at what appears to be some sloppiness, some quickness, some moving fast and breaking things, which is like the ethos of Elon Musk now applied to not just the American federal government, but the global economy. And so, it's one thing to talk about what happens in uninhabited or relatively uninhabited islands. It's another thing to talk about what happens with some of our biggest trading partners. And the fascinating thing is that Trump is really going after our friends, our allies. They are getting hit a lot. And there's really like a questionable logic there that Catherine knows a lot more about. Why would you not be hitting countries like Russia in the same way that you're hitting our close allies who we do a lot of business with?
Yeah. Libby and Catherine, thanks to both of you. Coming up, I could tell folks we have more revelations about Trump ousting national security experts based on right-wing conspiracies. And Marco Rubio and others have long warned that a day like today could come if there was a leader incompetent enough to overdo tariffs. That day is here. I'm going to show you the tape. Also, the growing anti-Trump protests, the pushback, and what a week for it. Stay with us.
What president walks mindlessly into a recession, which means it's harder to get a job, harder to keep a job, harder to pay the bills? What president does that?
Democrats calling out the obvious failed results of this new tariff push. We're joined now by a top Democrat. You probably recognize him, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Welcome.
Thanks, Ari. Great to be here.
Great to have you. It's not a secret to people who follow politics closely that you have a good amount of money and some business success. Is that fair to say?
Well, thanks for pointing that. Yes, as a matter of fact. And actually, that's why this moment is so worrisome to me.
Yeah, you know a lot about this, and I mentioned earlier in the broadcast that Trump talked a lot about business, but a lot of his background was being a TV host and a reality show host, and someone who sold wine branded with his name. But with all respect to the voters, I understand that some people thought he says he's going to lower prices. He says he knows about business. Give him a shot. You're in a business where I know you don't insult voters, so people thought that. Here we are today. What do today's results tell you about his business acumen, and is he gambling with American jobs in a recession?
Well, he's a big talker. He's a big promoter. Remember, his success in the real estate world has just been promoting, not much else. He's not very good at financing. Remember, he went bankrupt a couple of times. And this is a guy who is trying to put himself forward as a great businessman. But today, well, yesterday, he basically shot the U.S. economy in the foot. And we're now all going to suffer from this. You're going to see, I mean, we've seen estimates of this. You know, a U.S. automobile, a U.S.-made automobile is going to cost $3,500 more. A foreign-made automobile, $5,000 to $15,000 more. Buying a home, you know, lumber prices, all the things that go into building a home, buying homes is going to be more expensive. And of course, I was just in Mexico on a trade mission, just came back yesterday, as a matter of fact. And what you're hearing from them, from the business people there, same thing you're hearing here, which is uncertainty is terrible for the world economy and for the U.S. economy. And the result is that people are going to hold back on making investments. They're waiting to see what's going to happen. And one thing they know is it's bad for their economy. It's bad for the U.S. economy, bad for Canada. And yet we all know that what we really need is to bring down prices. And Donald Trump is raising prices for ordinary Americans. It's exactly the opposite of what his voters voted for. And I think it's important for us to point this out to people. And the result, by the way, is people now are beginning to see that as the prices are going up for the things that they care about, and as he's failing and they're discovering he lied to them, they're voting against Republican candidates across the board.
As for the Trump side, here's what one of his top economic voices, Lutnick, is saying. Is there a red line for you pulling back and saying, okay, hold on, we're going to rethink things?
No, you know, I mean, come on, the markets. When Donald Trump was the president last time, he put on tariffs. And if you go back and look at that news, everybody said, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And the stock market, as you heard him say yesterday, up 88% during his presidency. So what you've got to realize is, sure, there's going to be some short-term movement, but this is a reordering of global trade.
Is this just short-term movement?
Here's what happened today in the markets. Business people, investors from around the world that invest in U.S. markets are basically pulling back and recognizing that the medium-term and long-term prospects for the United States under Donald Trump are worse than they have been in quite some time. So a 5% downdraft in the market in one day is just the beginning. They understand that there is likely to be a recession caused by Donald Trump, that because of the tariffs, taxes essentially are going up on ordinary Americans who keep this economy going and who are going to pull back themselves. And we're already seeing, like, Stellantis laying off hundreds and hundreds of people. This is going to happen across the board, and it's very disturbing. This is self-inflicted. This is not COVID. You know, Donald Trump did nothing to counteract COVID, and we saw what happened to the markets back then as a result. But this is Donald Trump literally causing COVID and bringing that to the markets with his tariffs. The tariffs are a tax on ordinary Americans, and they are like bringing COVID back. It's going to have a long-term effect on Americans.
Yeah, and as far as the economy is concerned, you don't want to bring COVID back. We saw Mike Pence say, this is, like you just said, a tax. We saw Rand Paul say, in a warning to the entire Republican Party, past tariff failures like Smoot-Hawley cost them a generation of voters. Do you view it as that dire for them? And we heard from Schumer as well today. What are the Democrats offering in the alternative?
Well, maybe we should start by recognizing that what Donald Trump has done puts him in the category with Herbert Hoover, who put us into a depression. And that's my great worry. And so let's begin with the average folks out there are beginning to recognize that. And you saw on Tuesday the results of elections that really proved they came out to vote against what Donald Trump is trying to do. So is there a recognition that Republicans are failing? There sure is. Now the question is, what's the alternative? It's obvious to me that, we're the party, Democratic Party, is the party that fights for working people. We're the ones who want to raise the minimum wage, $7.25. No one can afford to live on that. That's $14,000 a year. We know that minimum wage, which has been around now for 15 years, is way too low. We ought to be at least doubling that in the United States. If you ask Republicans, they don't want to raise the minimum wage. In fact, they would like to get rid of the minimum wage. So that's what they think of working people. They are not the party of working families. We are. We're also the ones who want to make sure that everybody has health care. They're trying to take health care away. Look at what they're proposing to do about Medicaid. They want to take Medicaid in my state away from perhaps up to 1 million people. We have 3 million people that need help with health care. They're going to take a third of those people off of health care. That's going to cost you more, not save you money. So I'm very deeply concerned for average folks out there that are affected by this. But if you want to know what the political impact is, you started to see it on Tuesday. But Democrats, we've got to get out there and talk about the things that we're for. And like I said, we want better wages. We want health care for everybody. We want, sure as heck, we want to make sure that everybody is able to get a good education. Donald Trump tore the Department of Education apart.
Yeah, on quite a tough, historic news day for the country. Appreciate getting your views here. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Ari.
Absolutely. Coming up, a new national security crisis at the White House. And we were just talking about tariff history. We have the Ferris Bueller moment that reminds you what everybody knows about failed tariffs.
America is finally free from the tyranny of being able to buy stuff from other countries.
Yes, there's many different ways you can point out the problems in this now failed tariff policy as the markets plunge. Listen to how Trump's own allies, people that he has empowered enough to be a part of his team, but apparently aren't getting through to him, how they warned about what was a fairly well understood economic issue.
A tariff is a tax on Americans. A tariff isn't paid by the exporter. China's not going to pay the tariff. The buyer is going to pay the tariff.
Donald Trump has proposed a 40% tariff, which is a tax on all of you. I think raising your taxes by 40% would kill jobs.
China wins when we fight with Europe. China wins when the American consumer has higher prices because of tariffs that don't affect Chinese behavior.
That's what they said, because remember, even if you don't follow trade policy closely, this isn't one of those 50-50 issues. So while the parties do sometimes debate aspects of targeted tariffs, overall, both parties have said you want to avoid a global trade war. Here was President Reagan 30 years back.
High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs.
Millions lose their jobs. Economic historians note, by comparison, the new Trump tariffs are more widespread than any president and even broader than the infamous example of a failed trade war, the 1930 Smoot-Hawley tariffs. Those are seen by the light of day after many years of study as something that worsened the Great Depression. I said you don't have to be an expert, but Smoot-Hawley tariffs are one of those things that are part of common historical conversations and a very memorable moment. Part of the baseline joke was if the students didn't know the truth, the teacher was trying to show them tariffs are bad, from Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? A tariff bill. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
We're joined by Margaret Carlson. I will tell Margaret it did not work, and we sunk into a great depression. Welcome on a tough day for people who are paying these costs. We've covered the numbers a lot. Your view on that baseline political point. Many Republicans and others attacked these tariffs because they were bad for the economy and thus bad politics.
And everyone seemed to know that, even some people in Trump's cabinet, that that's just how it is with tariffs. It's not hard. It's just not hard to figure out. Even Ferris Bueller's teacher knew it. And, you know, if you were to go to Congress and say anyone, every one of them, even the ones that we don't think of as this, you know, the smartest in the world, they would know that. And they know that because they want to get reelected. And it's a simple matter. You know, there's a lot of times when you can figure out what Trump is doing by tracing who he has a grudge against. But he doesn't have a grudge against, say, Lesotho, who's up there at around 45 or 50%. It's, you know, it doesn't really make sense, except that Putin's gotten away scot-free. Now, I think the White House said, well, but, you know, we don't, there are already sanctions on Russia. It doesn't matter that much. That's not what it is. But, you know, it falls into a pattern that I do understand about Trump, which is he wants to lay off Putin. Putin is not in his sights. He supports Putin against Zelensky, and he supports Putin against having tariffs imposed. But that's the only, I just can't see it. And for the Tesla, Elon Musk, it doesn't seem to have mattered, does it, Ari, about his company? He seems to just be so rich that he can let his company lose millions and millions and millions of dollars and be kind of carefree and go off to Wisconsin and put on a cheap hat.
Yeah, but it may matter in the long term. I mean, that history has yet to be written. Where does Elon Musk land? And on ego alone, if Trump policies have him slipping off that top of the poll, we don't know how he'd react to that. I wanted to show you Rand Paul making the same Ferris Bueller point.
Tariffs have also led to political decimation. When Hot Smoothie put on their tariff in the early 1930s, we lost the House and the Senate for 60 years. So they're not only bad economically, they're bad politically.
With 70 seconds, Margaret, our political expert, how does that point seep out across Wall Street and the GOP?
Well, the GOP does seem to be getting that point. They don't want to go home, and they don't want to have to run again with this going on, because it's one of the surer things in politics that this is not a winning thing. If we're not in a recession, it would be a surprise. I mean, everybody in the Congress expects it, except for Trump in the White House doesn't. His advisors, other than, say, Howard Lutnick, didn't really want these tariffs. It's astonishing. Tim Noah, who writes for the New Republic, he started writing this morning, and his 401k was worth $12,000, and 45 minutes later, when he finished the piece, it was worth $10,000. So everybody feels this, and you can count it, whether you're a really rich person or whether you have a $12,000 401k.
Yeah.
And every Republican congressman up in the midterms knows that.
Yeah, and I don't know how well you know your Ferris Bueller, Margaret. But
my Ferris Bueller.
Well, he plays hooky. A lot of the film revolves around him playing hooky. And here with the worst crash since 5 years ago, with everyone on edge, a time calling for leadership, Donald Trump will be playing hooky from his job tomorrow. Margaret, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ari.
Absolutely. We have a quick break, and we come back with how right-wing conspiracy theorists are running national security calls. Next. Most presidents view national security as sacrosanct, but a renowned, infamous MAGA conspiracy theorist is now shaping one of the most senior parts of how national security decisions are made, the National Security Council. The president now firing 3 aides involved in that because of a meeting with notorious activist Laura Loomer. Reports are that she met with the president in the Oval and said she was dissatisfied with certain national security officials, and then she pressed Trump to fire some of those staff. She's controversial for, among other things, lying about and pushing false conspiracy theories about 9/11, of course, a major national security issue. But now Trump has her auditing and making important calls about who will advise him on sensitive national security matters. Any other day, it would have been, as we say around here, a larger story. But with Trump's tariffs sinking the global economy, we just got it in here at the end. Now, some of you have asked about many of the things that we share sometimes online, our mugs that you see on set. And I can tell you, you can always get them by going to msnbc.com/beat5. That's msnbc.com/BEAT and the digit 5 if you want to get up to speed on your MSNBC merch. That does it for us.